Looking back on Yarnell, a wildfire that claimed the lives of 19 men.
It was decision after decision that was made or not made that ultimately led to this crew being alone on a mountain.
And for the first time, we're hearing from the 20th man on the crew.
I needed to tell my brother's story, and the only way I could tell that is if I opened up.
Life after the Yarnell Hill fire. This is Arizona Week. Three years ago, lightning sparked one of the deadliest wildfires in American history. Flames burned for more than 10 days and in the end claimed the lives of 19 men. But 20 men were part of the Granite Mountain hotshot crew. On that day, Brendan McDonough served as a lookout. 3 years after the tragedy, he's written a book about how being a hotshot changed his life. What did being a hotshot mean to you? What did it mean for you?
At first, what it meant was a paycheck and a way to support my daughter, and that's what I was fighting for. That's what I wanted to do. You know, I kind of dive into some pretty dark places with, you know, my daughter and where I needed to be. And as I learned about, you know, firefighting, as I learned about these guys and who they were and what they stood for, not only on the line but, you know, at home, it was more the brotherhood. It was more than just getting a paycheck. It was more than supporting my daughter. It was becoming a better father and not only learning lessons that I'd have just then, but lessons I'll carry with me the rest of my life.
Tell me about that adrenaline that you would feel when you would get called to a fire, and what was your saying as you kind of rolled out of the parking lot?
I'd just be so excited, you know. I'd be yelling and hooting and hollering and just like shaking guys' chairs and stuff, and, you know, just full of excitement that I was able to do something that was providing for my daughter.
In the book, you say that a lot of it was financial, it was for Michaela. But then there's that moment where you're sitting down to chow, you said, and you can see those families and you realize they just lost their home. And that's when it hit it for you, that you said, I'm doing this to save someone's property or their livelihood, their memories.
Yeah, you truly can't. There's some things in life you can't understand unless you've been through them or you've witnessed them. And that was my first experience down on the Monument Fire of what we were doing and why we were doing it and why I was with who I was. And it just hit me when I saw their faces and knowing that it's not the home, it's not the structure of the home that they miss, it's the things that are inside, the memories, the family, the barbecues they had, it's the Christmas dinners, and those are the things that I sometimes didn't have that were the best. But I do remember the good ones. I remember the ones with my mother and my brother. I remember those ones, and they stuck in my head, and I wanted to do everything I could to continue to let people have that. It's not the house, you know, it's the memories that are built in it, and that's what I fought so hard for. That's what we all fight so hard for.
In the book, you talk a lot about the Horseshoe 2 fire in the Chiricahuas and how it was a different kind of fire than you had seen before. Did that one prepare you for what Yarnell turned out to be?
Looking back, I think every fire I was on kind of prepared me. Within my 2.5 years being a hotshot, I saw a lot of fires that were very, very powerful. You know, a lot of them were the biggest fires that some of the states we were in have seen, and they've continued to grow. So I feel like within the last 5 years, the fire seasons just continue to build and compound on top of each other.
Brendan was 19 years old when he joined the Granite Mountain Hotshots. As a crew, they traveled all over Arizona and the Southwest. Then the week of June 30th, a call to fight flames right outside their hometown of Prescott in the sleepy town of Yarnell. Tell me about June 30th. I mean, you think it's sort of run-of-the-mill, you're going to go fight another fire. What was so different about this one?
June 30th, until my brothers died, there was nothing different about it. It was like any other day of firefighting, you know, expecting to be there for 2 weeks or expecting to be home the next day, or, you know, just endless questions and continuing to try and find those answers. And it's just, I think the Marine Corps says it, you know, remain flexible. And I think that sticks with wildland firefighters as well, you know, remain flexible because the plan can always change. And so going into that day, that morning, it was just like any other day on a fire. Go in, get a briefing, you know, find a piece of line to dig into, get a lookout, get a safety zone, you know, establish, you know, LCES, get those things going and put it out. Whether it took 1 day, 5 days, 2 weeks. I mean, sometimes you go home for 2 days and you come back and you fight the same exact fire. And so that was kind of the mindset in the morning, you know, just ready to do the job, whatever it had.
As you watched the flames and you were the lookout that day, nothing looked out of the ordinary to you.
No, not until the weather it started to shift. And what is so hard, I think, for people to understand is the vantage point that my brothers did have, and, you know, almost 100% similar view of what I was seeing is what they're seeing, just from a different angle. And so it was just one of those days that as it unfolded, you know, things continued to fall through the cracks that, you know, could have been done, should have, would it to death. But that's just, I guess, the nature of the job is learning how to adapt with different changes.
There's been a lot of question about what happened that day, what went wrong. From your perspective, how did this happen?
I think it wasn't one decision. I think it was a multitude of different things that just didn't get put in place or wasn't executed to 100%. And when you think about it, there's nothing that we can do 100% in. We can't be perfect in anything that we do in life. There's not one thing that someone can sit there and say, I'm perfect in this. It's impossible. So we have all these other backup plans or, you know, resources that we use to try and make it the best situation possible to deal with what we're dealing with. I mean, we are fighting a natural disaster. You don't send someone to go corral or tornado. We don't have a way to do that. You know, you wait till the aftermath and you come in and you give help and you know, try and do the best you can. And for us, you know, we're fighting these fires that are tremendously huge with a small amount of resources.
In the book you describe, there was a lot of back and forth. It sounds like chaos to me. At what point did you realize that they didn't make it, that something had gone terribly wrong?
For a lot of people, I can understand where it can seem like chaos, but for us, I mean, that's just what we live in, you know, and some firefighters will have a different definition of chaos, and it's not the same across the board. And there were some moments that day that were pretty chaotic, but that's what we're trained to be in. That's why we train so hard. That's why we practice. That's why we have such a high level of physical fitness, because we're trained to be in those moments. It's not only our body that we're training, but mentally we're training to be prepared to make the correct decisions in the correct amount of time. So getting back to your question, I didn't feel as if they were in danger until I heard my superintendent talk about deploying the fire shelters. That's when I knew they were in danger. Up until then, I suspected to see them coming out on a road, seeing them, you know, 5-10 minutes. That was kind of the mind frame that I had at that point. Was there a fire burning through town? Yes. Was there, you know, helicopters flying over? There was. But that's a lot of fires. People were, you know, coming out of neighborhoods. Oh, we can't do anything here, so we pull out. You know, reassess, try another plan. That doesn't work. Pull out, reassess, try. You know, that's the nature of the job, is just to continue to try until you can't try anymore, until you win.
When you heard they were deploying fire shelters, what does that mean to you? Because you've been trained with how to deploy them as well.
It's your last effort to combating the fire overcoming you. It's a place you don't want to be in. It's a moment obviously no one would ever embrace. And it's something you hope you trained for and you took serious. When they were found, it wasn't like there wasn't a fire still raging.
Chris was your roommate at the time.
Yeah.
What was that like going home and he's not there?
Oh, wow. I don't even think I went home for the first 2 weeks, to be honest. I don't even think I was there. It took a long time to be able to go into the apartment. It was emotional. It was tough. Because not only was the person who slept 6 feet away from me gone, but every other person throughout the summers that I slept 2 feet away from was gone too.
More from Brendan in a few moments, but now Fernanda Santos, the New York Times Phoenix bureau chief. She also wrote a book. As a journalist, she says the Yarnell Hill fire was a story she couldn't let go of.
As I was writing stories about this fire, I kept finding myself having more questions than answers. Questions as simple as how do wildfires burn? What's up with weather? What are monsoon storms? I hadn't been in Arizona very long, so I didn't quite understand even how, the weather this time of the year worked. And I thought, given that there is a short lifespan to big news stories with newspapers, there was limited interest from my editors. And the curiosity lingered. Many times our curiosity kind of wanes, you move on to something else and you become curious about something else. But I remain curious about this story, about the lives of these men. So, I thought that the best way to satisfy my curiosity would be to write a book.
What do you think was the most fascinating thing you learned during this process?
It was really a redefinition of the word guilt or blame. There was a lot of focus on that when the fire happened. Who made the order? Who gave the order for this crew to go down the mountain? Essentially, who is to blame for their deaths? And blame has a very shifty meaning in this story because it doesn't necessarily mean something bad. Obviously what happened was horrible, but it means making decisions that carry a lot of risk, but they were not necessarily made with the intent of causing harm. And then once I accepted that, it was almost as if I was liberated to really pursue this story as I thought it should be pursued, which was more the human side of this fire.
In all your research, how did this happen? What decision was made? What led to this?
It's not a simple answer because there was not one thing or one decision that I can point to say this is what caused the deaths of these 19 men. It was decision after decision that was made or not made that ultimately led to this crew being alone on a mountain, having to make the ultimate decision all by itself, and having no one to be their balance, to their check, no one to say, is this really the best thing to do at this moment? So there's no one thing that you can blame. There's systemic flaws, there are human factors, a lot of different things that led to what happened.
You reached out to each one of the 19 families.
I did. I really wanted to meet these guys. I wrote a front page profile of the crew and the men that ran. The fatalities happened on June 30th, 2013. That story ran on the first front page of the New York Times on July 2nd, and I wrote it on July 1st as I was reporting. And I remembered that I only knew the names of a few of the men. And it really bothered me that I was writing so authoritatively about a group of men that I really didn't know anything about. I knew very little about. And not for a news story, but not enough for an understanding of them as people. And obviously I can't sit down and talk to them. And the best way to meet them was to meet their families. And I made a point in meeting every one of them.
Fernanda says the 19 men represented the epitome of teamwork and bravery because they had the courage to stay together until the very end.
You know, it's hard for a lot of people to think of a book about a fire where 19 people died, a book called The Fire Line, and not be caught up on the idea that this is a fire book. I'd like to think of this story as a universal story, a story that is about 19 men who loved one another, loved what they did, and chose to stay together until the end. I open my book with a picture from one of the investigative reports that shows the location, the positioning of the bodies when they were found. And they were very, very close. And that was the picture that showed me that this was a different story. This was not the story about a decision, a bad decision made by whoever. It was a story about the culture of loyalty that they fostered, that when it came time to make an ultimate decision, do we stay together and try to survive this wave of fire that's coming our way? Or do we each try to run for our lives? They didn't take a vote. They stayed together. The last radio communications that you hear the saws buzzing on the background. They were still working together, trying to save themselves as a unit. And I don't know if I had ever come across people other than soldiers who would be willing to risk their lives, or police officers do that too, risk their lives to save their partner, you know. And to me, there was such a powerful message, and my book is built exactly to explain that. What is it that made these guys stay together? But for you to understand that, you got to understand who they were about, what their crew was about, what their job was about, because all of it depended on the idea of unity and teamwork. And so, you know, I like to say that it's a book about people that happens to have fire as a setting. It's not a fire book.
There were lawsuits and litigation involved. Where are we now with that? Is that over?
It's a much less contentious process. The first of the lawsuits happened because of the 19 members who died on June 30th. Only 6 were full-time employees of the city of Prescott. And what that meant was that in life, the 14 seasonal employees did not have paid vacation, paid holidays, paid sick days, and in death, they didn't qualify for the benefits that the full-time employees did. The pensions that you received, they were part of the Arizona State pension system because they were part of a structural fire department. So they were union members and so forth. So they didn't have those types of benefits, these 14 families. Of these 14 families, many of them were, women who had children to raise. This is a job that takes the man away for long periods in the summer, so it was hard for some of them to even keep full-time employment because they had their kids at home. They had to take care of the house while their husbands were not there. Some families have started their own foundations. Other families have just sort of retreated and trying to live their lives as much as they can with as much normalcy as they can, always having that hole in their hearts. Others have met other people. Some of the widows have either remarried or just have partners living with them. At least 2 of them have had children, from these relationships, and so they are carrying on, which doesn't mean that they forgot the people who died. It just means that they still have a lot of life ahead of them, and they need to plan for that.
3 years after the fire, how are you describing the Granite Mountain Hotshot crew?
They really appreciated nature. They loved the land that they worked on. They loved one another. They loved their families. They loved the job they did. And those things are so rare these days. People who do everything they do, with passion, 100% in. And my opinion of them has never changed. I got to learn a lot about their personal lives. I got to learn about the way some of them stumbled along their personal lives. I got to learn about how they picked themselves up and rebuilt their lives. And they have nothing but my respect. You don't have to be a scientist or someone who discovers the cure to some big disease. Those are the people who make this sort of worldwide effect on things. You can be a very special individual in your own world And those guys were special in their own way to the people they cared about and the world they lived in. And for that, I'm grateful, because they made me understand that, you know, it's in the ordinary people sometimes, the regular people we see on the streets, that you find the most amazing of stories.
Brendan says the last 3 years have been incredibly challenging, and not a day goes by that he doesn't reflect on his time with his lost brothers. So tell me, what have the last few years been like for you? How would you describe them?
Living hell. That was the beginning. And then it just kind of recently, I would say, right around the time of starting to write this book, it's just been gradually getting better and better. Going through the process with the book and counseling at the same time was probably the best thing I could have done, because I've never been one to write in a diary, never been one to talk about something. And so what it came down to is I needed to tell my brother's story, and the only way I could tell that is if I opened up. So it wasn't about me opening up, it was about me opening up for them. And so people would want to read this book. And I'm just literally realizing this as we sit here, that if it probably wasn't for the book, I probably would have never opened up and continued with counseling. I probably wouldn't have dug as deep as I did to try and put everything out there.
How have you managed since then? I mean, you talk a lot about how you were a drug user, you were a felon, the hot shots saved your life, and then you dipped back into this dark place again. How did you come back up from that?
I think that I can admit that it's still a process today, that there's no finish line. I think it's just a lifelong marathon, but knowing what my brothers taught me and fighting so hard, I knew there was no way I'd go back to drugs. I just knew there's no way that I wanted to be a part of that. That's the legacy I wanted to leave behind, was the survivor who overdosed on heroin. That wasn't something that I didn't want my parents to have to deal with, my daughter, my family, even the other families. For me to survive and then to go down that destructive path would have been a slap in the face. And I can admit this too. There's been some things recently within the last 3 years that I've done that I'm not proud of. You know, I've filled voids with things that weren't gonna help me progress, and I can admit that. And now going through counseling, I can look back and say, those are not the things I want to fill my heart with. These are the things I want to fill my heart with. These are the things that are going to make me a better person, a better father. And it may not be firefighting, but there's other ways that I could, feel that fulfillment of giving back.
You asked yourself a lot then, why did I survive? Why not me? What have you decided was the answer to those questions?
I don't have an answer. I do have an answer. It's God. It's God. That's my answer. Why I survived, a definition or more information, I can't even fathom or try to begin to try and explain that. I just know that I'm here today and that I have a purpose and that I need to continue to try and live out that purpose.
You're talking with people about this experience. What do you want everyone else to gain from this?
I think what I want people to gain from when I speak is just the ability to accept the fact that we're going to struggle through things, and then it's okay to reach out for help. We lose so many veterans to suicide. We lose so many police, EMS, and fire personnel to this epidemic of them not feeling comfortable with asking for help. And that's the biggest step, and I think it's almost one of the easiest ones, is just to ask for help and the rest will come. And that's what I like to speak about. That's what I like to tell people and share, because there's only so much I can say about Yarnell. There's only so many answers that I don't have, and a lot of us don't have. But what I do know is what I've been through and what's helped me get here today.
Why did you decide to write My Lost Brothers? You said you weren't somebody who wrote in a diary or thought about this sort of thing, but why did you do it?
I wrote it because there's an opportunity to share their legacy. And talking with my mom, she had seen what had been portrayed to the media and what had kind of unfolded, and I don't feel like they ever got the opportunity to truly learn how they saved my life. I don't think that was dove into enough for me to be satisfied, you know, for me to be able to look back and say, you know what, I feel like people know how deep I was in such a dark place and where they pulled me out of. I didn't feel like I was able to express that, and I knew if I took the time to write this book that I could do that. That I could express to people, I could show them all my vulnerabilities. I mean, I don't like talking about going to jail. I don't like talking about being a drug addict. Those aren't things I'm proud of. Those aren't things, decisions that I'm happy about. Those things turn my stomach. But if it means shedding light to those things and for people to understand how far my brothers went for me, then it's all worth it.
What is next for Brendan Donut McDonough?
What is next for me? I think just living a life that honors them, and that's definitely a life worth living, and being a dad and trying to just be an advocate for people that are struggling to know and be willing to accept help. I see too many great men and women lose themselves to suicide in their families, and I want to be a better part of fixing that. I mean, they've given so much for our country. Without them, we wouldn't have these opportunities to be sitting here. I wouldn't have an opportunity to write a book. You can't do that in other countries. You don't have the opportunity to do that, and it's their sacrifices. They thought we were worth it. And so I want to be worth it. I want to be worth all their sacrifices. I want the people around me to feel like, you know, the men and women that have died, they can look at us and they can sit there and say they were worth it.
Brendan and Fernanda say their books were not about the Yarnell Hill fire, but rather the legacy and the lives of the 19 men. For all of us at Arizona Public Media, I'm Lorraine Rivera. Thanks for joining us.